You know,
I see. Yeah.
That's why another one.
It's an artwork, so we'll leave
Yeah.
the artwork away.
Many things and application. What is relevant for today? One of the things is relevant is this. It is the Frege Beaney, known all around the world as a collection of translation of papers by Frege. It's something we would like to imitate with Genoa-Philosophy, who is sorry not being here, and she wanted to come. And Mark Textor was the editor of the Journal of the History of Analytic Philosophy. This is a more recent journal than traditional British journal. And what's relevant for today, he wrote one of the best books on Frege on sense and reference, and I suggest you to read it because it's wonderful and very clear. And today we are just discussing a particular topic from Frege. Okay. Please, thank you for coming.
Thanks for the introduction and thanks for coming. So, Carlos said you have all some background in Frege. Frege, as a reference, is not entirely unknown to you. So I will use that to work my way into the topic. So I guess when one sums up what one learns on the first 2 pages of one sums a reference, sometimes people do it like this. I like to do it like this. So look, what we have, what we learn is something like this. We have the word Hesperus, and it expresses a sense. The main part of the sense is the mode of presentation. The mode of presentation determines an object, in this case a planet. Doesn't look like a planet, but it's supposed to be one. And then to say that the word refers to the object is to be explained as a product of the word expressing a sense and the sense of showing the object as a reference. So the relation of reference is a product of expression and determination. Looks good, but when one goes through Frege's further writings, one sees that this is kind of idealization. Because if you're very lucky, a word expresses a sense. More often than not, words don't express any sentence. And the examples he gives, which are on the handout, is to start with that dog. What is the sense expressed by that? Frege says, you can't look at the words, or say that dog is shaggy, the whole sentence, the wording, and grasp a thought. You can't do it. Have a look at the 2 quotes on the handout. The mere wording as it can be written down is not a complete expression of the thought. You get the idea that something expressed, but it's not a thought. The knowledge of certain circumstances accompanying the utterance, which I use as means of expressing the thought, is needed for us to grasp the thought correctly. Pointing the finger, hand gestures, glances, maybe not very true. So, if you're lucky, a type word, something which has a spelling, expressing the thought as a reference. But more often than not, or for particular kinds of words like demonstrative, complex demonstrative, this seems not to be the case. So you can stare very hard at that dog is shaggy, that what we can write down, and you would have no clue what is supposed to be the message, what is the thought expressed. So, for example, you need to add something to that. And get a kind of initial sense what you need to add is glancing. which are understood, I guess, as actions people do. Yeah? People intentionally glance at something. And if you take that into account and add it to that dog, the words that you can write down, then you get something like a complete thought. Now, Frege, I mean, there's an idea here, yeah? But there's no, Frege doesn't give you an argument for that. Frege makes a handful of remarks about this, in which he just throws this out. And this idea might be pulled into different directions. You know, if you look at the second clue I gave you, where it says it's not the concept word alone, so the concept word would be something like dog, dog. But the whole consisting of the concept word together with the demonstrative pronoun and accompanying circumstances, which has to be understood as a proper name. So it's not that dog, which the expression I wrote down here, but it's that dog plus other things which are going on when you utter it with a specific dog in mind. But which are these other things? Yeah? Is it, as some people think, pointing, or is it the dog? Or what are the things which you need to somehow appreciate to grasp a complete thought? And you won't get an answer to that just by staring very hard at Frege's papers. He doesn't say very much about it. There's something like 5, 6, 7 sentences about it, but they have generated a lot of attention. So what I want to do is I want to look at arguments which have been given for the view that that dog plus X plus something else plus something non-verbal expresses a thought and has a reference. So let's look at one argument which I find helpful and then try to work our way from there. So imagine that I'm a very slow speaker and I say that planet pointing to the evening star is nothing but, now it takes me several hours to say it's nothing but that planet. That can be informative. You can learn something interesting from that. Yeah? But how would you explain that informativity? How would you explain that you, if I'm a really slow speaker, can't take this for granted, can't simply assume it without any more reason? So it's not an instance of the law of identity. Why is that not the case? We have the same words. These words don't change their meaning during the night. Yeah? It's not like linguistic revolution goes on last night. So they have the same words, the same meaning. Now this thing is also true. So they both refer to the evening star, aka the Venus, aka the morning star. So where do we get the difference which grounds the difference in mode of presentation, which grounds, I say, the difference in inferential fruitfulness, which marks this out from something where I use the same words with the same reference and it's not informative. Words the same, reference the same, meaning the same, so it must be somewhere else. Well, I mean, you could say, quite plausibly, the difference is a difference in the way the speaker made Venus the object he's talking about, made Venus salient. And you would add something like, here's one pointing gesture, or one demonstration, one action, and here's another action which I'm making in the morning star. Okay, now we need to think about what are demonstrations. How do they work? how are they distinct? And one initial way to think about them is that they are the sign of actions which you can make in order to get people to think of something in a particular way. A demonstration is something you can understand or not understand. Like other communicative actions, they're governed by conventions. Yeah? So if I do, I've heard that, I don't know if it's true, if I do something like that in Italy, I'm getting into trouble. If I do it in the Netherlands, I get a ride to the next town. So it seems like these things, whatever they are, these demonstrations, have something like conventional meaning. And they can express like verbal signs more than presentations. And here's our story for this case. So we add demonstration 1 to this, demonstration 2 to this, and this, only together with these demonstrations, we have something we express as a complete thought. And in this case, we have demonstrations at least of the same type. That makes this non-informative. This is a story you will find in Kaplan, which he in the end revises, which is, I think, defensible. Another big problem is, Frege says something like, look, if you look at I, now, and here, these are also words which not on their own express sense. Can you think, I mean, that's good for this, but I, now, here, intuitively are not associated with something like demonstrations. And if you wanted to run the same argument, we would need to find something like informative instances of sentences which contain indexicals, expressions like I, now, and here, and explain and say, look, they contain the same indexical twice over. That is true, because it refers to the same object. And linguistic meaning is the same, so we need to appeal to something else to explain the difference in informativity. And if you look at the handout, also I recognize that, well, I mean, these kind of arguments, you can give them for demonstratives, but what is possible with demonstrative turns out not to be possible with pure indexicals. So these are somehow the circumstances, and it makes sense now to say, as Frege says in the first quote, used as means of expressing the thought. I let you hear my voice undisguised, to get you to think of me. I let you see me talking. That's my means of getting you to think the right thought. And these things, these uses or circumstances by the speaker, they enter the expression of the thought. Okay, I tried something for now, couldn't come up with anything. Mike has better examples. I wonder if he has something for now. I have an example for here, but since time is going on, I mean, you get the main idea. So, that's sort of say, filling in something about how this view would apply to indexicals and not just to demonstratives. And that has, in my view, has been a gap in the development of Frege's ideas. There was nothing, Frege never thought about, really sat down and said, oh, I need to give you an argument for this. I need to see how this hangs together. Just observations about natural language. I mean, natural language is anyway kind of mixed up, contingent, rumble, jumble. You don't even think that much about it. So this is an argument which helps you to preserve the idea of Frege's, people like the names. Okay, it helps you also to reject a different construal, a different direction in which people have tried to pull Frege's ideas. So if you go to page 2 of the handout, small Kripke and before him, Wolfgang Kühler wrote papers about the same topic. And I pick a bit on Kripke because he has a very vivid way to think about this. He says, well, if you have, so what is the thing which completes the type word I, the English first person pronoun, to a complete expression of the thought? What is this extra factor? Well, it's you. Or in this case, if I say it, it's me. So the complete expression of the thought is this. And it says, I didn't know whether you ever realized that, but people, times, and so on are unrecognized pieces of language. So all of you are a word. Not a word, but a piece of language. I didn't know that, but here we find it out. And we see, and that's something he says, that's the way to construe this phrase idea of hybrid properties. So I think that's wrong. And you can already see why this is wrong if you go to the first example. So think again of me coming through the Portuguese, talking, and then switching from relying on my voice quality to relying on manifestly, obviously, letting people see my addressing them. So I would say what we have is I plus use of voice. This is the unrecognized you piece of language, if you want. Concatenated with this, and I concatenated with use of appearance. Difference. Okay, these you have really two different signs in a broad sense, flanking the identity sign and the express different senses. It's all what Frege wanted to say about this. Now, if you're a Kripke, you have to say, I mean, who's coming through the departure gates? Me. Who's standing there at the departure gates? Me. It's always the same thing. It's I plus me as an unrecognized piece of language, and I concatenated in some way is again me as an unrecognized piece of language. That should be of the form A is A, and therefore uninformative. So Kripke's way of thinking about what needs to be added to type words, namely in the case of I, the speaker, in the case of now, the time, in the case of here, the place, always leads to, in this, it's not plausible. Yeah? It doesn't track with what you want is, you want difference between these hybrid properties to track differences in cognitive value. And that's not the case for Frigge's proposal. So it fails. And moreover, it makes this rather uninteresting. Yeah, what Kripke and also the thing couldn't do is he just read the idea that a reference is determined relative to certain context parameters into Frege and say, look, we take these context parameters like speaker, time, location to be part of the thought expression. Why should one do that, and why should that be not just be a notational variable people actually think? So that gives you, it makes it rather uninteresting to think about this. You might also have the case where you have different words. Plus different circumstances. Get the same thought. Frege gives examples where he wants to say that it's in this logic of 1897 that I am called and Textor is called express the same thought. given what I've said so far about completion by use of circumstance, you can see how you might think about that. So imagine, switch to a different example, not cold, let's use this wounded example. So here's Dr. Lau. You come across a man lying in the dust, desperately. You can see he's wounded. And he addresses you, looks at you and says, I'm wounded. So, what is this thought expressed here? I think a good way to think about this is, again, in terms of what does the speaker rely on in addressing you that way. So one thing he relies on is that you know the meaning of I'm wounded. Yeah? I'm wounded is true in English if, or I think better is to do it in terms of utterance. An utterance of I'm wounded is true if, okay, given that we have some speaker as that speaker is wounded. And now, if you phrase that, that's sort of what you bring from your linguistic competence to the situation. A knowledge about conditions under which utterances are true. But in order to apply this knowledge, you need to know which speaker. You need to be able to identify the speaker. And that's where all the stuff about circumstances get any purchase, use of circumstances. That guy looks to you, begging you for help. I'm wounded. He addresses you, he projects his voice, and so on and so forth. So he trusts that he doesn't need any circumstances to grasp his thought about himself. So it's kind of a situation from his perspective, it's a null situation. But what you can do now is you can exploit somehow the contextual features like his projection of his voice and so on, which he relies on, to demonstratively think about him. So in this situation, it would be okay to say that the thought expressed by an utterance of I'm cold, in this particular utterance by Dr. Lau, is the thought that that person is wounded, or is a cold. That person is wounded. So that shows that, as I said, different words completed by different circumstances of utterance can express the same thought. If you don't take these circumstances of utterance idea seriously in somehow explaining this, you end up with something which Edward Harcourt gives a good example of on page 3. So he thinks Frege has a kind of very liberal view of Trinitarian indexical communication. So Harcourt says, the proper linguistic function of indexical and other context-sensitive expressions, according to Frege, is, I claim, not to contribute to thoughts a sense of their own, but rather to serve as it were, as a blank screen into which senses are projected by those who hear them. Their linguistic meaning serving to dictate the reference which those senses must determine if there is not to be misunderstanding, but no more. So this sounds like, well, I mean, we have this case of I'm cold and Textor is cold. They can express the same thought, but that's just because the reference of I mean, the sense people should associate with I is so liberal. Yeah, you can do anything as long as the reference is right. As long as the reference is the right one, you can think in any way whatsoever of, in this case, me. I think that's not right, because it's not like you can think in any way whatsoever of me in order to understand I am cold or I am wounded. But you need to be aware of the circumstances used by the speaker. And just because the speaker uses certain circumstances, some ways of thinking of it will be understanding giving and others not. Yeah. You cannot think of me as the youngest son of Earl Arbesnot. Also, I might be the young son of Sir Arbesnot in order to send I'm cold. But you can think of me, if I'm using the right kind of circumstances, as that guy, he, and so on. So it's licensed by the circumstances used. So this idea that not words, but always circumstances used by the speaker in combination with words, express sentences, express thoughts, gives you a certain amount of freedom, which captures the idea that different words, different circumstances can express the same thought, without being too liberal, that anything goes, as Harvard assumes. Well, yeah, I think I should stop here at the right time.
It's coming out in mind very shortly. So
Yeah, next July issue.
right, so the paper's going to be published in Mind, so I strongly recommend it to read it, okay? It's to elaborate on what Mark has to say. So what I was going to do today was really just elaborate a little bit, make a few points in commenting on his paper, but then also put what he's saying in a slightly broader context. So I have one issue that I'd like to address in particular. So in that paper, I mean, what Mark's trying to do is to extend this theory of hybrid proper naming, which he's given account of today, which seems to work very nicely for demonstratives. So a hybrid proper name is the expression plus, in the case of demonstratives, the demonstration. Okay, so then the issue being, does that account extend to indexicals? And Mark's saying, yes, it does, and his argument is meant to show that you can extend this theory from demonstratives to indexicals. So demonstratives and indexicals are kind of in the same boat, as it were, as far as these issues are concerned. And I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think, they can be treated together. The more specific thing he's trying to do is to try to identify what is the extra bit in a hybrid proper name. You've got the name itself, and what's the extra bit? What's the completer? And he's wanting to say it's not the object or the thing referred to in some sense, but the uses of the circumstance. And again, I'm in agreement with that. So substantially, I'm in agreement with the paper, which I think it's a great paper, you should read it. But, okay, what I want to say today is that what I think Mark has tried to characterize is a certain conception of thought, which is there in Frege. Right? So I think in some sense it does justice to Frege, but only part of Frege. And I think that actually there's a tension between two different conceptions of thought, or maybe more than two, but at least two different conceptions of thought. So in my own book on Frege, a long time ago, the same year in which Carlo...
I wasn't deciding whether...
No, that's a long time ago. It's not where Carlo and I first got to know one another. We both published a book on Frege at the same time. We met up. This is a long time ago. But in my book, I actually, in a way, the central theme of my book is that there is this tension between two different conceptions of thought. Now, roughly one might say one's a kind of much more like a Russellian thought, a Russellian proposition, and the other's this more fine-grained conception of thought, which is what Mark has identified. Now, I think if one wants to say what's if one has to identify a particular conception that really does characterize Frege's thinking most of the time, it is indeed Mark's conception. Okay? So I think in that sense, again, he's right. But I do think there are these two different conceptions. Now, let me just give you an indication of what those two different conceptions are before we begin, and then I can perhaps elaborate on that in relation to indexicals. Now, they're in this Frege reader on pages 299 and 305. I can tell you, it's good that this is Carlo's book, and it's obviously well thumbed, so I know he's read it thoroughly. And indeed, I'm very pleased to say that on page 299, he's identified the criterion of identity for thought that Frege gives. Okay? So the question is, what is it that makes the same, as it were, when you have two sentences that express a thought, what makes them the same thought or not? Okay? And Frege very rarely says exactly what he means by by thought, and specifies the criteria of identity for thought, which is slightly strange because he's very much often being seen as someone who's trying to state what the criteria of identity are. He emphasizes that one needs a criteria of identity for objects, and he thinks the senses of those objects, so he should do. But he gives two, and interestingly, they both occur at the same time, 1906. So it's not that one from very early on, and and one's from later on, so he just changed his mind. They're at the same time, which suggests that there's a certain tension in his view. So here's one, which I'll just read out on page 299, in a little paper called A Brief Survey of My Logical Doctrines, where Frege is explaining his basic ideas. He says, so this is the fine-grained conception. Okay. Two sentences A and B can stand in such a relation that anyone who recognises the content of A as true must straight away, and the German is ohne weiteres, also recognise that of B as true, and conversely, anyone who accepts the content of B must immediately, unmittelbar, accept that of A. Okay, so the idea is you have two, now let me just kind of write it up in schematic form. So I've got 2 pairs of glasses, one for reading. I've got 5 pairs of glasses for different jobs. So here's a good example of an identity statement that's false. My glasses are not my glasses. So I have to change glasses. To write up just schematically here. So, you're concerned with what, here we have a sentence, let's say P and Q. Sentence P and Q. The question, do they, whatever that relation is, express the same thought on it? The sense of P, the thought expressed by P. So for Frege, as you sort of know, the sense of a sentence is the thought it expresses. So the question is, what is the sense of Q? So what is it for two propositions, two sentences to express the same thought, the same sense? So what is the relationship of equivalence here? Okay? So what Frege is trying to do is to specify a relevant notion of equivalence. He calls, in this particular case, he calls it equivalence. So the idea is, if you grasp the content of that, and you know that if this is true, that must be true, and vice versa, then they have the same sense. Okay, so that's the one criterion. The other one, which he writes in a letter to explaining his ideas to Husserl, and I suppose one might say there's a slightly different context. He's trying to justify his own camp. This is page 305, and Carlo, you ought to make a note of this one as well. You haven't actually put a pencil mark by the side of that one, but I know Carlo knows this one as well. So here, Frege says, now it seems to me that the only possible means of deciding whether proposition A expresses the same thought as proposition B is the following. And here I assume, well, there's a qualification. So, if both the assumption that the content of A is false and that of A be true, and the assumption that the content of A is true and that of B false, lead to a logical contradiction, and if this can be established without knowing whether the content of A or B is true or false, and without requiring other than purely logical laws for this purpose, then nothing can belong to the content of A, as far as it's capable of being judged for true, which does not also belong to the content of B. There's a bit more. So it's actually quite a more long-winded criteria. Okay? Now, very crudely, one might say that what Frege is offering is two different conceptions of sameness of sense. One on a kind of epistemic equivalence, and one that really looks like it amounts to mere logical equivalence in some appropriate sense of logical. Okay, so that's much more coarse-grained notion. Okay, now keep that in mind as I then go through some particular examples. I'm going to take another example to illustrate that. But maybe first, since as I said, I had two sets of questions. One, some minor revisions to what Mark had said, and then as we're bringing in a slightly different dimension. Mark challenged me, didn't he, to come up with an example of now is now. But also I wanted to say, he gave this example of that planet, right? That planet is that planet. In the paper there's quite a lot of discussion of the time it takes to say that. So you imagine Kaplan's example of someone who's a very slow speaker, even slower than that. Okay, so that planet, and then 6 hours later is that planet. Okay, well you don't need a planet to think about. You can think of an aeroplane going very fast. You say, that plane is that plane. Or imagine it, to make it more vivid, imagine it goes behind a cloud. Right? You might say to a child who hasn't yet worked out to think of it disappear in clouds, something else comes out, you might say, that plane is that plane. Okay? So it seems to me there's more ready examples where you can avoid the issues you get into about time, that in a sense is relevant. Okay? So in the case of this and that, this plane is this plane, I think it's fairly straightforward. Now that can be informative. This plane is this plane. Okay, just zooms through the clouds. Okay, now you challenged me about now. I mean, I was thinking about it. You have an example here. Did you mention it? You didn't mention it.
I didn't mention it, but
Okay. Now, well, actually, it's using one of your own first example of hearing a recording. So say you hear something, and you're told that it's a recording, it's on the radio, you don't know in other words what time it is. So someone said, the race is beginning now, yeah? But you don't know what time of utterance that has, okay? Then I might say, now is now. So you know that actually the recording, it's not really a recording, it's being, being played right now. That might be an example, I think, where we have an informative use of now is now. Okay? So you can have informative uses of, one can think of this one for genius like uses of I, now is now, here is here, and so on. So, okay, I'm all agree with that. Okay, so now, as it were, another example which I think puts pressure on Frege's notion of thought. And this, for me, this is, I think, the most interesting issue in trying to understand Frege's notion of thought, because it ramifies into all sorts of other areas of philosophy. Okay, it's an example that Frege himself uses, but then when you think it through, I think you get into problems. So say today, I say, it's nice to be in Genoa, it's brighter and sunnier than in York, so I'm glad to be here. So I say, today is sunny. Okay, today is sunny. Now, on a very kind of Freudian, in this fine-grained sense, you might say, well, I'm thinking of today is an indexical, I'm thinking of today in a particular way, a mode of present, I'm thinking of it as today. Today is sunny. Now, Frege himself, in Decadamca, specifically says that you can capture that same thought tomorrow. But how would I capture that same thought tomorrow? Exactly, I have to say yesterday is sunny. Say tomorrow, so I'm here, I'm today, I say today is sunny, now that's tomorrow, I say it here. If I say today is sunny tomorrow, I'm talking about tomorrow, which given Frege's view in sensitive terms reference, would mean it's a different sense. Okay, so saying tomorrow, today is sunny, will be a different thought. But of course, what I do to capture that same thought is to say yesterday was sunny. Now Frege himself says that's how we would capture the same thought. Okay? Now, you might say, is thinking of yesterday being sunny actually thinking of it in the same way as thinking today that today is sunny? Now, it depends how fine-grained your mode of presentation is. Thinking of today as today is arguably different from thinking of today tomorrow as yesterday. Okay? But anyway, Frege says I can capture the same thought when I say today is sunny. Tomorrow I say yesterday was sunny. Let's accept that. Okay? Well, here's the problem, and it's the problem that John Terry first identified. He called the problem of the essential indexical, which we can run in the case of this example. So I say today is sunny, but I don't know that today is the 14th of April 2015. Okay, so I can hold the thought. This is the first criterion. I can hold the thought. I can hold as true. Thought, oh yeah, today is sunny, but I have no idea what day of the week is. So I think, I might think it's the 12th of April or something. Okay? So I can think today is sunny is true, but the 14th of April 2015 is false. That's coherent. That's just the kind of example Frege is always using to motivate the distinction of senses, right? So one would say the thought expressed by today is sunny, said today is different from the thought expressed by it's sunny on April 14th, 2015. That seems fine. Right, now here's the problem. So now you've got today, then you've got tomorrow. What about the next day? How would I express the same thought? Well, the day before yesterday. Yeah? Okay, well I should have started here really. Okay, today, what's today? Today's Tuesday. Yeah, Wednesday, Thursday, the day before yesterday, the day before. Yesterday, etc. But I can't keep on saying day before, the day before, the day before, the day before, the day before, right? What happens next Tuesday? I'll say last Tuesday, like the sun. Now, does that express the same thought? It just seems to be a very small step. I say, yeah, it's the same thought. I need to use the day of the week. Well, now think of trying to capture that thought through time all the way to next year, or in 100 years' time. How are you going to capture it? Seems at some point you're going to say, we use the dates. Tuesday, 14th of April, 2015 is sunny. Or it's sunny on that day. Yeah? So now we've got our, this is the problem. Okay, it seems if Frege is right that you can capture the same thought day after day after day, unless you're going to say, well, day before, the day before, the day before, the day before, and that's something I'm just not going to be able to work out. I really have to work it out. Okay? It seems you first of all help yourself to the idea of a day, Tuesday, Wednesday, then the idea of a month, and then the idea of a year, and then you're back in the problem. Okay? So that seems to me a problem that Frege has. Okay? I mean, one could run the problem in slightly different ways. So here's another example I thought of, not quite Frege's. So, which actually puts pressure on a different principle in Frege. It's sometimes called the transparency principle. You think if you grasp two thoughts, you must know whether they're the same or not, which is often being said to apply to Frege's conception of thoughts. Okay, and it was captured in this criteria as well. So imagine saying it's sunny now. Now is sunny. At time t1. Let's have 3 times which I say now is sunny. Now, T3 is tomorrow. T1 is today. Okay? So, the thought I express today when I say now is sunny is different from the thought I express tomorrow when I say now is sunny. Okay? And you might think, maybe I should say today. Today, I think. Let's stick it to today. Keep the same example. Okay. So it's clear that that said tomorrow is going to be expressed a different thought than that said today. Now, let's imagine that that's also said later today. So this is at 12 o'clock and this is at 1 o'clock. So it might be, well, it depends now how fine grained you're going to be, but that expresses the same thought. Or even if it's a minute later, I say, oh, today is sunny. And then I say, oh, today is sunny. Right? Well, that's just the same thought. It just expressed the same thought twice over. Okay? But now imagine that I'm a narcoleptic. I've been falling asleep, and waking up, and then not knowing what day it is. Right? So I know that I'm a bit of a narcoleptic. So I say today is sunny. I fall asleep for an hour, and I wake up and say today is sunny. Okay? An hour later, I express the same thought. Right? But now imagine that actually I sleep for 13 hours and I wake up tomorrow. But think I don't. Right? I would say today is sunny. Right? Today is sunny. I will think, presumably, if I don't know that I've fallen asleep, that it's that I've expressed the same thought. But I haven't, of course, if we have this idea that sense becomes reference. Okay? So that seems to me to put pressure on the idea of transparency. That I might think saying today is sunny, you'd be perfectly correct to say that. And tomorrow I say that, but I think it's the same day. Okay? So I grasp your thought, but they're not actually the same thought. Okay? So that's another problem, I think, with the put pressure on this idea of transparency for Frege. Okay, let's leave that for now. Just come back to this problem of sense of peace. So, the reason I think this is a very important question is for a number of different reasons. I think the tension in Frege's conception of thought comes out in particular two kinds of problems. One is the problem of indexicals, which we just see in all indexicals and demonstrative. And what's interesting about that example, as Mark mentioned right at the beginning, is that really there's only 2 passages and only one in published work where Frege considers indexicals at all. Now, the reason he doesn't consider indexicals is that his concern is with mathematical languages. And certainly, as Mark mentions at the beginning of his paper, in mathematics you might think that there is no indexicality or any kind of contextuality. I don't think that's quite right, because one needs to know what the kind of language of mathematics. I write 2 + 2 = 4. If I write 1 + 1, just take a very simple example. 1 plus 1 is 2. Yeah. 1 plus 1 is 10. Yeah. Is that true? Yeah. If you're in a binary system, yeah, it's true. Okay? So we kind of, in a sense, there's a sort of implicit contextualization to the language in which we're working. I think that there is an issue, so I think it also applies if we're translating arithmetic into set theories and the different set theories. Anyway, there's a, I think it's not as straightforward as Craig seems to think. The idea is that in a mathematical language, there is no indexical. I just write down a mathematical sentence which will judge if it's true independent of the time effects. Maybe that's true. Okay. Anyway, but the two areas, yeah. So that's why Frege doesn't concern himself too much about indexicality in his work. Is that he's not, as often said, he's not really concerned with developing theory for ordinary language. But of course, we subsequently are interested in seeing how his ideas extend to ordinary language. He's concerned with mathematical logical language. But where the issue does arise is with his discussion of the status of the so-called Hume's principle and axiom 5. And I don't know if how many people know about the debate about Hume's principle and axiom 5. Maybe I should, we've got time to briefly mention it? Yeah. So it's crucial in Frege's, let's have it down here. Philosophy, just, I mean, in the sense of what we have, that's why I've left this up here, is an equivalent kind of principle. So we have two concepts, F and G, okay? And they're, as he puts it, equinumerous, gleichzahlig. Okay, we say the number of F's equals the number of G's. So his example, one of his examples is, you have a waiter who's laying a table with a knife and fork, right? So you have the concept fork on the table and the concept knife on the table. And as long as for every fork you've got a knife, the waiter goes round, okay? You know that the number of forks is going to be the number of knives. Okay, so if two concepts can be one correlated, then the number of F's equals the number of G's. Okay? And something similar carries over into this famous axiom 5. Okay? And actually what's interesting, this is what's now called an abstraction principle. And actually what we have here is also a kind of abstraction principle. Yes? We're abstracting out the concept of sense from a relevant equivalence relationship defined over sentences, etc. Okay? So the status of these is quite important. Now in the Foundations of Arithmetic, where he first talks about what this is called Hume's principle, he says that these have the same content, inhalt, but carve up that content, split up that content in different ways. Now, at the time of the Foundations of Arithmetic, he hasn't made the distinction between Sinn and Bedeutung. Okay, so the question then arises, does Frege think that these have the same sense or not? And on that issue, there's been a lot of controversy. Some things, because this is a fundamental principle in his logicism, they've got to capture sameness of sense. Okay? So he sort of saying this has the same sense as that, not just the same reference. Okay? But that doesn't look plausible, and on a fine-grained conception, the one that Mark was trying to identify, it looks like we're thinking of the situation, whatever it is that we're concerned with, in terms of concepts being equinumerous, being one correlated. In another case, we're thinking of them as an identity statement between top names. So this reveals and also a very fundamental principle that Frege has, that the same thought can be expressed in radically different ways. And he says in a very, very famous footnote in Concept and Object, okay, logic would be crippled if all transformation of an expression was forbidden. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, when we do logic, we are always transforming expressions. How do you formalize all humans are mortal. For x, if x is a human, then x is mortal. We're transforming the expression, and it's an assumption of the whole process of formalization that we're capturing the same sense. But we've got two sentences here that have radically different forms. Okay? So this is sort of understood as a logical principle, the same idea might apply here. These must have the same sense. We're simply transforming this sentence into that sentence for some particular purposes. Okay. So that's, if you like, the transformation principle. These two fundamental principles, I think, are Frege's ideas about thinking about thoughts, or at least as people thought about the transformation principle and this transparency principle. The transparency principle, I think, doesn't work. Something wrong about that. Okay? But the transformation principle, it seems to be absolutely fundamental. Okay? Now, my worry is, if you like, it's a worry to a challenge to Marx's account. I think it does work for a particular conception of thought, but the question is, how do you do justice to the other features of his thought, where he's recognising that you can express the same thought in radically different ways. Okay, so Indexicals, you have to transform an expression to keep up. That's why my title is called Tracking Thought. So I say today now is sunny, tomorrow I have to say yesterday was sunny. Okay? Now, and then the next day I have to say the day before yesterday is sunny. Now you could say here, and this again is something that isn't brought out in this discussion of hybrid property, but I think is important. You could say that you only understand what today means if you can also use corresponding indexicals, say yesterday, tomorrow, and so on. Do you really understand what today is? If you aren't able to say tomorrow, today's Sunday, it might be slightly different from saying now. There was a little hint, I think, at one point in Mark's paper, I can't remember where it was, where he talked about, if I say I am here now, So I say, I'm going to say something true to you. Please, possibly don't always say things true, so I'm going to say something true. I'm not arguing. So I say, I am here now. Have I expressed a thought? I said something true, right? I said something true, with all the completers that one might put in. But have I expressed a thought? It seems to me I haven't really expressed a thought if I don't quite know who I am, where I am, and what time it is. So imagine, we had a good night out with Carlo last night. He took us to a very nice wine bar, and we had a meal in a nice restaurant, and I drank too much. So I'm still a bit groggy. I think I'm so groggy I don't quite know who I am anymore. So I wake up. Okay. Well, in fact, let's spin the story out a bit more. So Carlo's a trick. He drove me into a forest. Okay, a dark forest, and I'm put in the middle of the forest. I don't know what so dark I can't see anything. He puts me in the forest, and I wake up. And I say, oh God, at least I can say something true. I'm here now. Seems to me, I haven't really expressed a thought. If I don't quite know who I am because I'm still waking up from this hangover, I don't know where I am or what time it is. That's a very extreme example. But it looks like you can only really express a thought if you're able to re-express it in some other way. I think that's actually a very fundamental idea, and I kind of want to keep hold of this. And it's something actually I say to all my students at the beginning of teaching them philosophy. I say to them, to understand something properly, it's not enough just to repeat what your lecturer said. Right? You've got to think it through for yourself. You've got to put it in different words. Why do we interrogate someone to see if someone understands something? Right? It's because we want to see how well they understand it in terms of their ability to express things in different ways. And there's this lovely example in Das Leben der Anderen, the life of others. Have you seen that film about the Stasi period in East Germany? I think it's a wonderful example. So this is this occasion where the Stasi interrogating someone, okay, and they keep interrogating. And someone who's made up a story, right, to tell the Stasi, okay, has a particular line, right, and they can't deviate from it. They have to make something up if they're asked about the story in a slightly different way. Or so, what colour was the table that you said you were hiding under the things? And they have to invent something because that's not part of the story. Whereas if something really happened, you can bring in other things about it. Okay, so the thought is, if you really understand something or experience something, you can re-express that, elaborate that later. Okay? So I always say to my students, you know, the test of whether you understood something is whether you can repeat it. That's why we have tutorials, not just, you know, having lectures. They've got to be able to re-characterize that. It's what lies behind, I think, of the inferentialist idea. That you only fully grasp a sense. Or rather, I want to say something a little more radical than Mark might like. Maybe there's at least a conception of thought in which you want to allow room for kind of knowing that thought, grasping that thought better or in a richer way. It's the same thought, but one comes to know it somehow better. Not just, you know, it's not just there's a whole series of different thoughts, but somehow there's something that you're still expressing. And that seems to come out quite well in the case of Indexicals. So they say, do I really know what I mean by what thought I'm expressing when I say today is sunny, if I'm not able tomorrow to say today is sunny? I can't. I want to leave room for having the same thought, but being able to express that same thought in richer and richer ways, which is what philosophy is all about. Okay? And it seems to me that this very fine-grained conception doesn't really leave room for that. But there's some other examples that we can use, but I think I'll leave it there.
Just time for you.
A sentence might be for both the speaker and the hearer. And we can imagine of cases of informative science, of utterances of sentences with demonstratives for both the speaker and the hearer. But the example you gave seems to me is informative only for the hearer. The example about I and I. And I wonder whether that might make any difference or any comment from your claim that we can treat demonstrative the same way, pure text the same way. And the second question is about your argument against criticist views. And your argument is that if we apply criticist view to the case of I and I, we cannot explain the informativeness of such sentence. But it seems to me that your argument relies on the idea that an identity statement where both two sides of the identity predicate, where in two sides we have the same name, then the statement, the sentence of the utterance of the sentence cannot be informative. Right?
Yes and no.
Because yeah, it's.
I mean, it depends very much what you mean by name. I mean,
Yeah, so this is how I understood your argument. You say, okay, if we apply criticist view, then we have a sentence like I plus me equals I plus me. Right? And this cannot be informative because it's the same form of A equals A. But it seems to me that there are cases where we have examples of A equals A, which are informative.
yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with that. But it depends. I'm going to stand up. So you want to have, I think, at the level of sense, you want to have something which reveals the sense of the expression. So here's an example where we have something like Paderewski is Paderewski. Yeah. Not in, it's, well, I mean, who knows? Yeah? It's, I guess for some people, for the enlightened, non-informative is an instance of the law of identity. For some people, it's informative, so we have the same expression. But Frege would say, I mean, I'm talking from a Frege perspective. Frege would say, well, you need something, you need a symbolism, a way of regimenting such sentences which reveals the sense completely. And in order to reveal the sense completely, to really bring out the thought expressed, you need to add something to it. And you would, I guess, treat Paderewski similarly to, I mean, of course, on the level of Polish or English, another language, there's no, you have the same words, but on the level of a language which is suitable to track the logical relations, the inferences you can make, and so on, you need to expand. And hybrid proper names are not something we are accustomed with in grammarians of English, or so on, accustomed with them. They are something like one level up. We try to regiment in such a way that somehow the logical potential becomes more obvious. I think that's what Frege is about. And as a proposal for that, Kripke is no good. So if you think, what is the thing which completely expresses a thought? That's usually, I guess, very, very seldom, very rarely, a natural language word, just something you can write down. If you look for something like that, you're not looking for words. And I take Kripke to address that. Yeah? And then I think that principle is plausible. Yeah? You need to find some way to distinguish this. What was the first question was again? Okay. Has it something to do with I think that's a special case of the first person pronoun, yeah? Because someone who uses consciously the first person pronoun I find it hard to imagine a situation in which he somehow fails to grasp that these uses are of the same object, at least in one utterance. But I guess that's just very hard to avoid for the first person pronoun. It works differently for here. Yeah? I can give you an example where it works with here. And the person herself thinks that is something informative. That's something I can learn and I need to have evidence for. And because just the first person pronoun has this feature of immunity to misidentification from the person using herself, she never needs evidence for such judgments. It's just unfortunate that I can't disentangle them. That's just how it is. And you have an idea how to do it.
No. Can I just make one comment on what you said? Another thing I was sort of interested in your paper is to come down to different points. One thing that I was thought about when thinking about Indexicals is the possible gap between expressing a thought and grasping a thought. Okay, so I suppose a question to you will be in your account. So let's accept, and it's a convincing case of made here, that you've identified all that's needed for the complete expression of a thought. Okay, so that's nicely done. That's all right. I think there's a question whether one needs to know everything that's involved in the complete expression of a thought in order to grasp it. Now, there's a distinction between grasping, understanding the complete expression of the thought, and grasping the thought itself. You might want that distinction. So we might say, yeah, there's a question about all the elements that are involved in the complete expression of the thought, but then there's still a question, what's involved in grasping thought? Is there room for someone to say, well, they don't fully understand everything that's involved in its complete expression, but they can grasp it somehow? Yeah, so that was something that I think in your paper. I mean, maybe more needs to close that gap. But for times I wondered whether that. I mean, when you read Frege as well, there's a sort of slippage from talking about expressing thoughts to grasping thoughts, and they seem to be different things. And
there's even something more, something I haven't thought about that much, but I think it would be worth talking about. There's one word which makes it even more difficult, which is grasping a thought correctly on the first code. I find it difficult to think, what is that? So I grasp the thought, but I grasp it not correctly. It's on that handout. It's not saying so. In the first sentence of the handout is the mere wording as it can be written down. It's not a complete expression of the thought. The knowledge of certain circumstances accompanying the utterance, which are used as means of expressing thought, is needed for us to grasp the thought correctly. It's not grasping. There's something like correct and incorrect grasping. He never says that again. But that's quite suggestive. I thought about it, but I could make something of that, but I didn't come up with anything good.
So it's still here. It seems to be an open question whether one can grasp the thought that someone expresses in the same way as whatever it is they do when they. I mean, grasp it. Let's assume that when they express the thought, they themselves grasp it in some way. Okay, and it may also be true that you might need to know the circumstances, etc., in order to grasp the thought correctly. But you don't need to know them in the same way as the person who expresses the thought knows them.
Yeah, that's right.
In some way, precisely because it's indexical, someone who expresses a thought may not know, may not be aware of the circumstances themselves. It's just part of the context. But you, in order to understand it, you need to know more than the person who's expressing the thought, right? If that's the case, there is a gap between expressing you. A person can completely express their thought, but it might take someone else to grasp it.
So maybe he means completely rather than correctly.
Well, who knows what that exactly means, but it's what I mean, I can use. Let me think something at bottom like this. I do something on top of, in addition, or in doing, in uttering a sentence, I do also something else. Yeah, I make something salient. And then you need to take that on board. Is that the same piece of knowledge? I mean, in my case, it might be practical knowledge, but you need to appreciate what I want to do. I think that needs to be the case. Is that now the same thing or not? I don't know.
I think this is a really, really important question. It's a really important question as philosophers and as historians of philosophy, because you read texts, and the people you're reading, you're expressing thoughts, but I want to allow room for saying, well, look, we can come along later, or someone else in particular, and maybe grasp that thought better. Maybe it was not inchoate, but there was something they were expressing that they perhaps couldn't quite articulate it fully themselves. But we'll come along later, and I want to, whatever the detail of the particular case, I want to leave room for that distinction between expressing a thought and grasping the thought more completely.
I can see. So if you think about the paradox of analysis, or if you think about, Frege has at the beginning of foundational arithmetic this metaphor of stripping away the covers from the thought and so on. Yeah, if it's about something really, it's not about it's sunny today. I think there are not many covers to be stripped away. If it's numbers or objects, you might think a bit more about it. So I agree with that you want something like this for a certain kind of thought, and Frege is very keen to have it. But one needs to have some idea of what that makes for segments of thought. What could it be? What could it be?
But do you think there's a single notion of thought that really captures everything in Frege? Or do you think there are maybe different conceptions of thought in play in Frege's philosophy? He perhaps switches, he slides around sometimes from one to the other.
Well, he certainly wants to have, this is all bar numbers, there's lots of discussion of Hume's principle and so on. In which sense does Hume give an analysis of numbers?
Yeah.
Okay, that's one thing. It might be that for these kind of everyday thoughts, I need a beer today, and so on, you don't think there's something deep going on and that there's something we can understand better. There's something, that's where I take myself to discuss this stuff. There are other problems arise. But for this is, of course, the question, what is, in which sense would you justify a move from equinumerosity to sameness of number? If it's really the same sense, that's very easy to justify, I think. But that also cuts the other way, because it seems to be something need of justification. It's not the same sense. So we go back and forth, and I would need to have some kind of.
Okay, so I would just make an example. If we follow your thread, if I telephone you and I say, I am tired, then I open the door and I tell you, I am tired. These should be two different thoughts. But then, when I say I am tired, in order to understand what I say, you may say, "Are you tired?" I say, "Yes." And you express the same thought I am expressing, saying you are tired. And this is a completely different notion of thought. It's
No, I think that's
more
exactly the
two
same.
conditional one.
No, I think that's exactly the same.
How can they be the same? Did I get the point?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
No, I think it's I and you. So there's one thing which is quite general. What do we say about something roughly the paradox of analysis? Yeah, that's completely independent of indexicals. I mean, is justice fair distribution of goods? What do we say? Or Frege's project. Frege's project somehow depends on, I think that's right, to have an answer to the question whether the left and right hand side, or the top and bottom, express the same thought or not. And I mean, Burge tries to give, Burge somehow gets into gear and says, same thought clearly on one side, so the clearly apprehended, the other is not, and then he tries to say something what clearly apprehension means. So that doesn't work, but that's somehow getting to work, isn't it? Yeah? And you need to have something which allows you to say of two different expressions or sentences which fail. So we need to look at this again, which we seem to be rational denial, or seem to be in need of justification to move from this one to that one. That is still express the same thought. And you need to have something there, and it's very difficult to see that I know of no good offer. Yeah? Otherwise, you say, oh yeah, there's a demand for that, and you want something like that, but you need to give me a kind of grip on what could it be.
I mean, it seems to me it's only a problem if you think that there has to be a single conception of thought that, as well, captures everything Frege wanted to say. Yeah, maybe there's slight differences between indexicals and these kinds of cases, but then maybe that shows we need two different conceptions of thought. Do you think one that's appropriate to senses, to indexicals, one that's appropriate to this kind of case?
Let me put this another way. So if you look at the sense identity criterion and hypothesis, what he says is this holds given that the contents of A and B are apprehended without any difficulty. I think all the problems are in this experiment. So your case where you have today, the day after today, the day after today, if you somehow were able to hold these two thoughts together, it's not like apprehending the content of today is the day after today. That's quite difficult to apprehend. You need to exercise memory. You need to literally to track something through time. And that makes, in a way, Frege's criterion not applicable to all of this.
It's very difficult. The criteria needs changing anyway for indexicals, because you have to be very specific about the afferents, because it's not that you can grasp them simultaneously.
Yeah. So, anything which is of interest is sort of captured by this clause. Yeah? This criterion applies only to very straightforward, unproblematic cases. So we don't know what to say.
Okay, so can I just say one more thing? It's sort of generalization of this, which you might like even less. Okay. So going back to here. Okay. Here I said there's some kind of equivalence relationship between here. Okay. Now the question is, you could identify all sorts of equivalence relationships between here. Okay. And I think the key idea is, if you like, what you're wanting to do is, let's say there's a little box there that draws on a certain kind of understanding. Okay? And they're equivalent relative to that understanding. So if you take Frege's example in the Berufschrift, Appetite, the Greeks defeated the Persians, Appetite, the Greeks were defeated, Appetite, the Greeks defeated the Persians, Appetite, Persians were defeated by the Greeks. So it's just simply active passive switch. Now, Frege said these express the same content, but you certainly say they express the same sense. If you understand them both, you can immediately infer that one's true if the other's true. Why? Because you're just drawing on your basic grammatical knowledge of active-passive. Okay? So let's say you have these little modules of grammatical understanding, various kinds of logical understanding, knowledge of context, whatever it might be, right? So for every little box, right, that you're invoking, you'll get a different equivalence relationship. Okay? Now, if this is as it were, in a sense, this is an abstraction principle, right? Given an equivalence relationship, you can define a relevant notion of sense. So you get as many different notions of sense as there are coherent equivalence relationships that you can specify, each of which will be relative to some little box. Now, that makes sense of Frege's two criteria. The logical one is to say, well, purely exercising your logical abilities, can you go from P to Q and vice versa? If yes, they have the same logical sense, if not. In the other case, there are more fine-grained ones. And he talks about immediate, and this is actually crucial and actually problematic. If you can immediately infer that if this is true, that's true. And now what does immediately infer? Think back to the today is sunny. I say today is sunny, or yes, tomorrow I say yesterday is sunny. I can immediately infer that someone who says today is sunny will hold that saying tomorrow, yesterday was sunny is true, right? That's fairly as immediate as you can get. But now you think, well, what about in right? There's a horizon paradox basically running here. As soon as you use the word immediately, right? And so there's another thought, not just immediately. So actually there are two criteria in the literature based on this. Some people say they don't use, forget the immediacy, if you can, as it were, merely by thinking, go from one to the other and vice versa, then they express the same sense. Right? And that's in between the two criteria.
But even by thinking, just you have to go yes.
Yeah, but
it's not.
But the point is that there are there's lots of little boxes there, and so lots of little equivalence relationships, and so lots of different conceptions of sense. There's no single conception of sense.
So why would you want to call all them? Of course, there are a lot of different equivalence relations. But one way to do is to say one of them is giving you sameness of sense, and the others give you something else.
Well, but what? Yeah, fine. Okay, we can say that. But what are they giving us then? So we have Textor sense, which is your sense, and maybe we have Frege sense and Kaplan sense. And,
no, I think so. What do we want from sense? I think this is the I think Strawson pioneered out here the 50s, and then John Campbell came up with it again. So if I go from FAGA to then X, X, and GX. Why don't I need further premises? Well, because I can hang on trade on sameness of sense. In some cases, it's just
stand this way for people to see you there.
Okay. In some cases, I don't need a reason to assume that I'm making the inference pertaining to the same individual. Also, it's not like I think, oh, this and this are co-referential, and they have that as a kind of background condition. This is the background for transparency. There's a real oomph to it. Yeah?
It's not possible. In the Tractatus, Wittgenstein draws out this supposed transparency. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not sure how.
So I agree that kind of tangible. On the one hand, you have this sense needs to be the thing which makes sameness of reference obvious to people who grasp it. It's the same sense. You grasp the sense, then you know if there's anything referred to at all, it's the same thing. That's something really important. Without that, logic can't get going. On the other hand, Frege has this curious project to do this. It's kind of very general, but it's a version of parameter analysis. And that requires sameness of sense to be discoverable. Yeah? It's something which you could say, hey, look, that's a signal of that. That doesn't go easy together. Is it the right response to see that we have different?
Yeah, see, I think this is what's gone on in the whole neologicist concern with the status of this. So Bob Hale spent years of his life. I spoke to him about this later. He asked himself. He's a chap. Trying to formulate a criterion of identity, say in the sense that captured this and exactly this, and not other things. And in the end, he gave up. Right? You can't. And so then when we're left, we just said, well, we must stipulate.
It's a stipulation, that's what he said.
Exactly, that's what he has to come. We just stipulate it has the same sense. Or we stipulate it's logical. and then if you like, by using some such principle here, you just actually stipulating the same as the same. That's fine. That's that's actually okay. You're stipulating. But then you think, well, then what's the status of the claim that the arithmetic really is logic? Well, Frege.
Stipulated.
Yeah, exactly. Frege. But that seems to me exactly what goes on with philosophical concepts. You pull them out. So if you ask the question in Kant's time whether arithmetic was logical, and by logical you meant Aristotelian, the answer is of course not. Right? In order to show, in order to make plausible the claim that arithmetic is logical, Frege had to develop his logic. Right? Logic, in a sense, okay, this is, means something slightly different for Frege.
But then, that's what.
Yeah.
What's the man in Berkeley?
It's back to McFarlane.
McFarlane. Yeah. So if that would be the right way, then just think about it. Then Frege would have not taken as a challenge at all. He would just have said, "Oh, we need to check out."
Yeah, but what's interesting about what McFarlane does, and so McFarlane is somebody who wants to can say, well, actually, so let's just step back a bit. On Kant's view, arithmetic is not logical.
Because there's a restricted logic.
There's a restricted logic. On Frege's view, let's say it works, it is. Okay? So then you say, well, Kant and Frege are not speaking, they're not sharing the same thought. They're not speaking across purpose, they just have different conceptions of logic. So McFarlane comes on and says, well, hold on a minute, let's see if we can uncover something that, as it were, brings the two together. So someone will think, oh yes, if Kant, as it were, sort of, thought about it like this, he would have realised that he was wrong and Frege was right. In other words, you have to tell a story. Right? And that's exactly, in my account of analysis, that's exactly what goes on in analysis. We tell a story that, as it were, brings together the relevant bits, for the purpose of some fruitful theory. Okay? But you have to tell the story. Okay? You have to specify what the relevance equivalence relationship is, and then you can indeed say they have the same extent. So you're sort of stipulating. It comes out as a stipulation, right? But there's a lot of work that goes on before you get to that stipulation. And I mean, one of the really, really important passages in Frege, which I think you should really, really read, is the 1914 paper, Logic and Mathematics. That's where I think he tries as best he can to answer what is essentially the paradox of analysis.
There's this view that you don't grasp the sense clearly and kind of...
Yeah, but the key bit is that he says the interesting work goes on at the pre-theoretical level. He keeps saying, this is where elucidations come in. I mean, he hasn't fully appreciated how important that is. But actually, when you look at his own work, most of his work is precisely that elucidation, that pre-theoretical work. Or on my account, on concept, on sense and reference, and function and concept are elucidatory works. They're not part of the logicism, they're the pre-theoretical. They're to get the building blocks, as he puts it in Logic, Mathematics in place. And we could argue saying new logicism, the same thing's going on. Might trying to put in slightly different building blocks in order for this to come out as having the same sense.
Basically, the abstraction principle should be a kind of stipulation.
Well, that's what Hobbes thinks.
Yeah, but that's.
Which is contrary to probably the phrase.
It's not there's either stipulation or it captures exactly what we mean ordinarily, we can immediately see. And it's, oh yeah, of course, oh wow, bang bang, they have the same sense. Or it's just stipulated, so we just have to take it. No, you've got to see what is the work doing? What is this work doing anyway? I mean, it's more that, like the example of, maybe this is an easy example to use, it's one Frege uses. So the line A is parallel to line B, right? The direction of A, okay, is equivalent to the direction of B, so then the direction of B. Well, what do we mean by direction? You have Mark there, and me here, and we're going towards the church over there, so we're going in the same direction, but the lines aren't parallel. Okay? So it doesn't seem like this exactly captures our ordinary conception of direction, but of course that's to miss the point here. We're in a sense providing a more precise notion of equivalent, of direction, and perhaps also in the process providing a more precise notion of line. But all of it hangs together. So one thing that we're doing in analysis is actually forging conceptual connections or tightening our concepts in different ways to bring together in a particular network. And yes, some of those concepts will be used in slightly different ways in ordinary language, but that, that's irrelevant if we're bringing them together. So it is a stipulation, but it's not just like all arbitrary. Now I'm going to decide that you're going to be called David Cameron. It's just like, I just stipulate. Well, from now on, Carlo's going to be called David Cameron. I mean, that's a kind of completely arbitrary, stupid stipulation, right? The stipulation must have some particular purpose. Now, so from now on, we're going to call Carlo the boss. Okay, there might be a reason for that, so that we all, follow what he says and so on. Okay, so if it is a stipulation, if it's a decent stipulation, there must be some rationale for it. Yeah. Anyway.
It must be justified.
Yeah, you have to be able to tell a story. And in a sense, it might also depend on future success. And stipulation, you can make a stipulation, and it turns out to be a useful thing to do because it's reshaped our concepts, and that in turn becomes fruitful in some way. And in a way, that's what Mark's doing in the paper. I mean, that's what philosophers are doing. He's actually gone way beyond Frege in his account of Indexicals. Frege doesn't use the word hyperpropylene. Is that wrong? Does that mean it's not a good account of Frege because Frege never uses the word hyperpropylene?
Well, maybe.
It's an analysis, right? It's a drawing out of features of Frege's thought that are very, very implicit. Did Frege grasp the concept of a hyperpropylene? In a sense, your whole paper is saying he did, and here it is. But I don't know. Yeah?
That kind of analysis looks like making hypotheses.
No, I say it's a kind of conceptual enrichment, reconceptualizing. For me, analysis is a good analysis is one that invokes richer conceptual resources to recharacterize something. Yeah. Okay.
Is that the right analysis?
Well,
Or is there just
a successful, a useful, a fruitful, shedding new. I mean, I think right. I would want to resist that it's either right or wrong, or right for what purposes. There's different set theoretical reductions of the natural names. Which one is right? There might be different things that we're trying to justify that.
That doesn't sit well with. I don't know how much you want to capture Frege, but Frege thinks there's one thing to do.
Yeah. I find that intriguing. And I think one thing, almost as a sort of phenomenological remark about the practice of doing history, of philosophers, is that philosophers think they're somewhere tracking the truth. But actually what they're doing is just giving us richer conceptual tools to think about something. Certainly, it's a classic example. Frege is taking the world to divide into functions and concepts. His use of functionality analysis was what made possible the development of quantification analysis. Wow, powerful, wonderful, wonderful. But Frege then says, oh no, there are these objects in the world, there's objects and there's functions, two different kinds of entities. He thought he was tracking the truth. That seems to me mistaken. But by saying that, I don't want to say that the richer conceptual resources he developed in quantification logic is somehow illegitimate. So you can separate out the realism. It might derive from the actual conceptual enrichment.
There are a few questions, maybe two, no more.
Can I speak in Italian?
Yes.
I have some problem with pronunciation. And la mia domanda sarebbe riguardo al discorso del today's sunny e della concezione che permette di dire il giorno dopo yesterday is sunny. Questa è un'abilità, in un certo senso, una capacità sempre attiva anche durante i pensieri che non la chiamano direttamente in causa, oppure soltanto quando pensiamo qualcosa di strettamente relativo a un fattore temporale la chiamiamo in causa? Cioè fa parte del nostro vivere cognitivo costante, oppure no? Better in Italia.
Today is sunny and yesterday was sunny.
Yeah.
It's a kind of mental ability we possess independently of what we are speaking about, or we use it just only in the moment we entertain this kind of temporal thought.
I'm not sure I quite.
Something like Evans, mi sto riferendo a qualcosa di quel riguardo.
Speaking about Evans.
Yes.
Yeah.
The difference between subjective space and time and objective projection. The subjective conception, I understand that is always present in Evans, also in all type of thought.
So is this the question that we were thinking we might want to bring out as well from our discussion? Something that Mark says in the paper.
Yeah.
Mentioned the idea that
For
maybe
both.
with indexicals, a use of indexical on a particular occasion may in fact express more than one thought. Right, one might be purely subjective, one more objective. Now, Frege himself, famously, in Decadamka, said that there is, when Gustav Flaubert says, "I am wounded," he's expressing a thought that only he can have, because he's presented with himself in a unique way, so he can only have that thought. Right? But when I say I'm wounded, and I'm going to mark here, so I'm thinking of myself in a particular way that no one else can share, so I have a thought that no one else can share, but in order to make Mark grasp something, I say it in the way that Mark has elaborated, in such a way that Mark can pick out and say, this is the person who's now addressing me is wounded. Okay? So Mark was suggesting, well, maybe we should see this as there being two thoughts. There's the private, purely subjective thought, and then there's the objective thought. Yeah? And now, that's problematic for Frege. Gareth Edmonds was very concerned about this, because it looked like for Frege, thoughts had to be, were communicable, objective. So it looked like Frege was abandoning that view and allowing there to be purely private thoughts. The same, it's not just a problem about I, actually, going back to my example, it's a big problem about now. If you think of now, if I say now is sunny, there's a very particular way of thinking about now. Right? That in a few seconds later I can't pick out. Then whenever I say now is sunny, I've expressed the thought that I can never capture again at any later point. That kind of looks almost a redacted out of dirty, but reminds me, well, there is a very particular thought I have. I have lots of people, now is sunny. Next minute later, now is sunny. So on. And I can never express that. Okay? And Frege doesn't want to go down that line. You want to say, well, you could say, then it's sunny, and that's the same thought. So I think that is a bit of Mark to add something there. The question whether maybe the only solution is to say you express something, but there's different thoughts being expressed. You can express more than one thought, such that someone else can grasp one of them but not the other. But that's, I think, a qualification.
Well, you could also, I'm not sure whether there's at least that's something like an option there. I can think the thought I'm expressing as I'm cold, without using any circumstance. But no one else can do that. And that's a big difference. So in order to grasp and re-express the thought I can express without exploiting any circumstance, you need to exploit some circumstance. Namely, whatever I did in my utterance of that thought to get other people to think of me in the right way.
But it's a new knowledge, or is it something that we have hidden also in other type of thought? When we say today,
in the now case, so that would speak in favor of thinking there's one thought, but the circumstances. Sometimes if I think now it's cold, it's not really that I'm relying. I myself thinking that I don't rely on anything. I just can think that. And it will be about the right time. But in order for you to grasp the thought.
So just one quick response to that. So, yeah, there's a sentiment to that, right? Going back to the point I was making about the importance of being able to re-express it, it seems to me that you don't really understand
I don't get that.
what it is for you to be cold unless you can somehow. So it's almost a kind of Kantian thought. You've got to be aware that it would be something that you would express to someone else, you could recognise in something similar in other people, etc., etc. I mean, these concepts come as it were in a package. To know fully how to use the word I, you've got to know how to use the word you. To know fully how to use the word today, you've got to know how to use the word yesterday and tomorrow, etc., etc. These these terms like come in a package. They're not, the idea that I say, expect any thought when I say I'm here now, just strikes me as, it's a minimal conception. I think one needs to, have richer conceptual possibilities to re-express it, to be said to fully grasp that thought. That was the key point I was wanting to make.
Yeah, I would like to have more of an argument. Especially about Descartes and okay.
Yeah.
Short question.
I have two questions.
One.
If we say that f and g are equivalent, we are expressing an identity or a function that makes f equivalent to g.
Oh, so if I say the concept f is equinumerous, can be 1-1 correlated with the concept g. The concept fork on the table can.
But it's
Sorry,
the concept is the forks. I mean, the forks are in the same number.
The thought that the knives on the table can be correlated 1-1 with the forks on the table, right? Expresses arguably the same thought as the number of forks on the table equals the number of knives on the table. That would be the claim.
I was thinking it in a mathematical way because I think 4 is equal to 4 is different to say that 2 in base 2 is equal to 10 because I use a function, an injective function, to translate the 2 into 10. And so the first identity was an identity, and the second one was a function that makes type 2 that translates the 2 into 10.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so two different types.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think there are lots of different kinds of identities. I'm sorry, just trying to think of 2 equals 1 plus 1. Where you say that's within.
This is an identity.
Right, that's an identity within our normal language. This is expresses the identity between 2 as used in decimal notation and this as used in binary notation. Yeah. I mean, same way I could write 2 equals 2 or something. I mean, I think there are different sorts of identity statements. This is more just merely notational. This captures, Frege would say, this captures a kind of thought. But this is just a notational. It could be just a notational difference. But they have maybe different statuses. I mean, I give some other, actually, quickly, I mean, I think also had something similar talking about revelatory senses and so on. I mean, I could,
We are finishing with identity, which was the starting point of
Yeah.
So we made English speaker.